In this video, I'm going to continue talking about personality selling and how to use personality selling types, but actually giving you a real life world example, something that you might be able to latch onto as I go through my story, try to identify characters in the world that you're selling to. This is going to be powerful. Hang on. What's up, FlowChat Connector? Sean back at you here with another high-ticket tune-up. Hope you're doing really well. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this out to some other salespeople that need to get better in sales. Today, I'm diving into a conversation that we started on the last session that came from a question from Sam. This was Sam's original question. He said, Sean, I have a hard time finding acceptance from my boss. Could you help me understand why she seems so cold to me all the time? And if you recall the last session, what I did is I actually broke down all of the personality types. And so in this video, I'm going to take it one step further and I'm going to give you a real life example of which you can listen through this story. It's just a story. It's not going to take too long to tell, probably a couple of minutes, but you'll understand how each of the cast of characters plays in. We call it the cast of characters because when you're selling bigger ticket and you have more people involved in a sales conversation, there's more that you have to do. So with that said, this is going to be a continued from our last session on personality selling, and it's an example of how to sell to the entire cast of characters. Okay, so with that said, here we go. We will dive right back in here. Now, if you recall, here was the chart. Now, this chart shows you all the different personality types. If you use the extended disc model, is the one that I teach and use, and I've been using it for years and years and years. It's really powerful. People are motivated by either being introverted or extroverted, if you recall, and they're either action more oriented and results motivated or people motivated. And so that creates the 4 buckets. And so if we look at an example of this, first and foremost, we have the dominant guy. So in this case, for this example, it's going to be Rich. Now, Rich is a guy who shows up a little bit late, doesn't really care about how it gets done, but he's just about like, yo, what's the result? Is it going to get me done? You can see in this picture, he's wearing a red tie and a black shirt, but he looks really sharp. Typically D-style people dress very sharp. They usually don't take too many notes. They know all the who's and they point and just say directions all the time, right? So he, in this case, was the director of the supply chain, and his favorite word is what's in it for me, what it's going to take to get it done, sort of a thing, right? So I'll share how he plays into the story kind of at the end. Secondly was the influencer. This is John. Meet John. John was the supply chain director in the example that I'm going to be talking about. Now, the supply chain director, John, he's a classy guy. He also has a little bit of influence over the sales department. And so as the supply chain director, the sales team would come to him and say, hey, John, how do we get this thing on time? How do we do the delivery? How do we do all this stuff? So he worked with the sales pros, but he's actually, in this case, the supply chain manager. And his favorite word was who, like who's going to be at the meeting? Who's going to be doing the what, right? So he's the who guy. Next, we have the critical thinkers, right? There's 2 of them in this case. There's going to be Stacy, and then there's going to be Lupe. Now, you can see how Stacy is dressed. She's the one, if you're thinking about C-type personalities, these are the people who dress for function. She's wearing a t-shirt so her arms can flutter around. She's wearing jeans because she doesn't care what she looks like. She's got the comfortable shoes on. And then you've got Lupe. Lupe was, so Stacy managed circuit board assembly, electrical, in our example that I'm going to share with you in a second. And Lupe handled all the wire harnesses that connected to all the circuit boards. So it's 2 different divisions. These are the 2 heads of them. And Lupe was all about lists. And so you can see she has her little clipboard. She liked lists, details, organization, and data. So does Stacy. But again, I just wanted to share, like, visually, you can determine a lot of the time what somebody's personality is by the way they dress, by the way the back of their office looks. And so if I were to walk into Stacy's office, and I used to do this often, you would see that her desk would be piled up with paperwork and this and that and the next thing. And I'd ask her, like, hey, where's this thing? And she would know exactly where to go in her pile of papers and say, oh, here it is right here. I'll be like, how did you even do that? Her filing system, only she knew how it worked, right? It's like one of those kind of pack ratish, like they just know where everything is kind of a thing. Lupe, on the other hand, was more on the digital side. So she had the kind of the iPad, she had the computer inventory up, and she knew how to, like, her whole calendar was color coded and it was perfect, right? And so the critical thinkers in this group are going to be, in this case, the buyers or the engineers or the programmers, and their favorite word is why, right? And then lastly, we have the steady relator. We can't forget the steady relator. This is Robin. Robin, in this case, is the office administrator. She's the one that I met first out of all of these people, and I'm going to walk through the whole case example. And her favorite word is how. So how did this all come about? Well, I was selling selling circuit boards. So I had an electronics manufacturing company located here in Las Vegas, and we built circuit board assemblies. So this particular company is a gaming company, and we would build all the electronics that would go inside the gambling machines. And so these are the 5 people that were real responsible for getting those big gaming machines put together so that they could give them to John, who could pass them on to the sales team, who could go sell them to the casinos. And so that's where this example kind of plays out. So I was in charge of growing the business for our manufacturing company. And so I went to this company, and the first thing I did is I walked into the front door, and the first person I ran into was Robin. So I see Robin, and I start chatting with Robin, and I find out like she knows she knows everybody. She knows how they work, how they operate. She just is that people person. And so I started speaking with her a little bit more. And I said, hey, listen, like, who would be the person that's in charge of this, this, and this? And so like as we talked a little bit, she's like, well, I can't really talk right now. So I was like, that's okay. I left. And the first thing I did was I actually sent Robin a card to say thank you for the time, even though it wasn't very much time. My very first meeting, I was in that office for maybe 15 minutes. I talked to her for about 5, maybe 8 minutes. And then I left, and I sent a thank you note and saying, hey, Robin, I just want to say I'm really grateful to have met you. Thank you for sharing the insight that you did. I love how you, and I use the word how, I loved how you knew everything that was going on and how all the people played together nicely. I think you're doing a wonderful job. Keep it up. Right. And so the next time I came back into the office, she saw me and she was so excited because I'd sent her this thank you note. And she goes, oh my gosh, Sean, that was the greatest note. Thank you so much. I was like, no problem here. In fact, I brought you this cake, and I brought him a cake, and I said, you can share this out with all of the people that are special to you. And she loved that too. Right. So there was a little bit of that happened in the beginning. And I said, Robin, like, in exchange for this cake, what I need you to do is, who are the people inside of the buying loop, which would be Stacy and Lupe, because those are the people that I needed to start my next part. So, and by the way, this sales process took 2 years. So it wasn't like an overnight thing. It was the first week I met Robin. The second week I came in again, the third week. And then it took about another 2 weeks. And I consistently kept coming into this building to break this account down because I really wanted to win the business. Eventually Robin says, no, you need to speak with Stacy. So Stacy becomes the next person that I start focusing on. Stacy was in charge of circuit board assembly. And so I got myself a meeting with Stacy. And then Stacy typically, the critical thinking type, doesn't want to have people come back into their office simply because it's too time consuming. So she just came out to the front office the first time I went and met with her, and we sat down on a chair, and she started asking me a whole bunch of questions about what I am, who I am, how we work, what it's all about. And she wanted to know why I was even in the building. So she questioned me pretty thoroughly. We went through the ringer a little bit, and I got to know Stacy just a bit, right? As soon as I said to her, I was like, oh, well, after we did a little business talk, I asked her, like, what was she into? And she said, well, my family. And then she got into her boys, and they played baseball and all this other stuff. So we had some rapport that we could build there. And so then after I left there, I sent Stacy an email. Now, the critical thinker people are about efficiency, right? So they're not wanting a card in the mail to be delivered into their inbox. They would rather have an email that just pops on their computer. They can click it, read it, and delete it. So I knew that. So I sent Stacy an email. I was like, hey, thanks so much for the time. Hope your boys are doing good in baseball. And like, here's a couple of things that you asked about that I just want to give you a little more information. I'd like to tee up another meeting with you to talk about this, that, and the next thing. And so I went back and I met with Stacy about 3 more times. And then she said to me, yeah, Sean, you're actually doing the right stuff. Let's get you in a meeting with Lupe, because I do the circuit boards. She does the wire harnesses and cable assemblies. So Stacy helped because she saw kind of the process of what's happening. She brings Lupe in. So now it's me and Stacy and Lupe. I met Lupe for the first time. She was very sharp. She came in. She said, hey, I need to know first article acceptance. I need to know timing. I need to know why this is happening and when it goes this way. So same thing with Lupe and Stacy. I use that kind of why mentality of why it's working that way or why it's going to be a good success. And that was how I teed up all the information in the conversation that I had speaking with them. So at the time now, I've gotten Stacy and Lupe on board. Robin's still there because she's kind of the gatekeeper letting me in and out of the building. And next they say, well, look, we got to go through John. Now, John was a guy, he's a supply chain manager. He came in from another business. He already had all these processes in place, and he had a good network of people that he already knew. And so I was competing against his network that he already knew. He had all these people that he already had. He's the who guy, right? So he had all these people in his network, and I had to go in there and the thing that I had to do to win John over was I had to share with him why I was the person that was more valuable to him than all the other people in his network. So that was my focus when I was selling to John. So every interaction I had with John, it would be more so about like, hey, look, you're selling. I'm the person that's responsible for this. I'm the guy that's going to get the job done for you. I'm going to make sure that you win. I've got the team behind me. And so after we had those kinds of conversations and he started buying into me, that was what took. So then John became on board. And the next thing that we did is at this point is we started delivery, right? So the first thing we did, John was like, hey, look, I need to know timing so that I can get my guys the circuitry so they can build the cases and sell them out to the other casinos that need these machines. So that's fine. So we lined up a big map and Stacy and Lupe were on board. Robin was in the meeting and John. And then we said, okay, great. So we have this done. We got our first articles of our circuit boards that we built for them. We got the cable harnesses. We hooked them up and it all worked perfectly. We showed them the test and they're like, this is great. Now we just got to get John's or Rich's signature. And I was like, well, who's Rich? And there's like, well, Rich is the director of our supply chain. He's the guy that signs the big checks. And now at this stage, we were looking at a multiple year deal for into the 7 figures. So it wasn't a small sales deal that we were working on here. And they said, look, nobody gets through Rich. Rich is one of the hardest nosed guys that you'll ever come across. He's as a man of few words. He has a power ego-ish kind of thing. And so these guys were whispering this to me. And I said, well, let's get him in a boardroom. Let's go through the whole thing. And they said, okay, cool, Sean, come back in a week on Tuesday at 9 a.m. We'll have the thing dialed in. I show up at Tuesday. I go into the meeting. Everybody's there. We're sitting in there. And I had already sold every single person except for Rich. And I know that CEOs, high D personalities love to be challenged. And I know that this particular company was always about like whittling down to the last penny that was possible. And so I'd gotten the pricing stuff dialed in with John and Stacy and Lupe. It was in line with where it would needed to be, but we weren't the lowest guy. And so Rich walks in the room a little bit late into the meeting. And I was like, hey, Rich, nice to meet you. I'm Sean. How's it going? He's like, I'm good. What are we talking about? I was like, well, it doesn't matter. Before I even showed him anything, this is how I closed Rich in the first 2 minutes. I said to Rich, I said, look, well, we have this really great plan that's going to win for you guys over the next 2 years. It's going to save you a bunch of money. It's going to win, but it's regardless because I know that you're always about the bottom dollar and you're about what it's going to do for you in terms of the pocketbook. And I don't think you can afford me. And I challenged his ego in front of his whole cast. And that was the moment where he said, give me the paperwork. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, let me see the agreement. So I slid the agreement across the table to him and he pulls out a fancy pen out of his pocket and he looks at it. He looks at John. He's like, John, is this good? John's like, yeah. And he looks at Lupe and Stacy. He's like, is this good? And they're like, yeah, Sean's awesome. And then Robin just like gave the thumbs up. So then Rich puts his pen down, signs the piece of paperwork and he's like, here. And he just pushed it back in my face. He's like, I got to go. Nice to meet you. And he got up and he left the meeting. And that was how I was able to lock. It was a $1.2 million deal for a 2-year agreement with this particular company, but it started with going through the entire cast of characters, and it took me about almost 2 years to actually close the entire deal. And so I just want to give you a big example. Like sometimes the sales cycle does not take that long, but it should give you a good idea of like who you're playing with and how to sell them. And I think that's valuable for anybody to kind of hear and see and listen to this story, because when you know how that works, then you'll be able to close more deals more often. So with that said, hopefully that one helped you. I know that was a great example that I use all the time, sometimes when I'm speaking to other salespeople that I'm speaking with. But with that said, you've just been tuned up. Have a great day. I can't wait to see you next time.